Oh, Colts Nation! Football is back, baby. I mean, that feels amazing. It's kind of this time of the year. It doesn't really actually kick in for me. Like, it doesn't really feel like football Sunday until all the games are going at once, right? Like, you look at a game like last night, the first game of the season every year almost doesn't even feel real to me. Did you enjoy that one, though, between the Chiefs and the Ravens, huh? Not a bad game. How about that at the end? I mean, the toe just barely on the line. I'll tell you, as I was watching that game, I couldn't help but think to myself, the Kansas City Chiefs are everything that the Colts want to be, try to be, wish they were. Now, I know everyone would like to be the Kansas City Chiefs, but I'm just talking about the way they build, right? You look at the offensive guy in Andy Reid, right? The guru at head coach, we have Shane Steichen. You look at guys like Rashee Rice, Isaiah Pacheco, cornerstone players in that offense. Rice is a third rounder. Pacheco, a seventh rounder, right? That's what Chris Ballard likes to do. He likes to build through the draft to do that. It can't just be first rounders. You have to be hitting in the second, the third, et cetera, right? You got this kid, Jalen Watson, on Kansas City, a corner, seventh rounder last year, making plays on Zay Flowers. Now, of course, he didn't dominate Zay Flowers throughout the course of the game, but when it came down to it, he made a couple of important plays on him. This is what the Colts' best case scenario could look like one day. Of course, Patrick Mahomes helps, and no one is really going to beat Patrick Mahomes. What I'm saying, though, is that the Colts, the way they build, what they look at as the Mecca, as like the way it can be, is the Kansas City Chiefs. My evidence for that, one, is everything I just said, but two, where's Chris Ballard from before he became the GM of the Indianapolis Colts? That's right, the implication, you guessed it, from the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, of course, that has absolutely nothing to do with the reason you clicked on the video. We're here to talk about the Texans versus the Colts. And we will start to talk about that game now that I've basically gotten that rant out of the way and just wanted to get that thought out there on the episode about that with the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, this game right here, I mean, as a Colts fan, right? As a Texans fan, you got to be pretty confident. As a Colts fan, you know, you're kind of, I don't know the word, a little anxious, right? And I'm not saying the Colts can't win this game, right? But they absolutely have their work cut out for them. I mean, that much is clear. You're talking about a team in the Indianapolis Colts, and we say it ad nauseum, but you got to keep saying it until it's not true anymore. They have not won a game in the opener since the year 2013. The only time they didn't lose a game was a tie to these Houston Texans in week one of what was the Matt Ryan year, 2021. That score was 20-20, a tie, which at the time, when you think about it, I think the Texans had lost 8 straight games against the Indianapolis Colts, and the Colts had that streak in week one. So these were like 2 unbreakable streaks. The tie would have been an unbelievable bet to place that day. But that's neither here nor there. The Colts, again, have not won. That's something they have stacked against them. Josh Downs not playing. We know how much of a difference maker he is. We really expect him to have a big year as he comes back, right? The chemistry between him and Anthony Richardson was very hard to ignore during training camp and all of the preseason type of stuff, the offseason, really, if you will. I'm on the record saying I think he has a chance to push Michael Pittman on a week-to-week basis for targets. Like, I think this is not 1 and 2. I think it's a 1A, 1B situation. Just something about the way these two meld together. Kind of hard to explain, but AR and Josh Downs have a great connection, so that's something they have to overcome. And, of course, that's not even to mention the talent discrepancy on paper between these two teams. I mean, it was a tale of 2 off seasons when you look at the Texans and you look at the Colts. The Texans just went on a shopping spree. Obviously, Danielle Hunter was a big one. The Colts allegedly offered him a little bit more money, and he decided to play with the Texans. But you bring in Joe Mixon. You bring in Stephon Diggs. And the kid from, the heck is his name? The kid for the first-round pick from Detroit. Jeff Okudah is kind of a low-risk, high-reward move for the Texans in the secondary. I'm sure there's other moves that they made, but the point being is they were very, very active. And now you look at that receiving core in its entirety, and you say Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, and then you got Joe Mixon. You got Dalton Schultz there, and of course you have the great C.J. Stroud, and you say, not for anything, you know, how can the Colts possibly stack up? But then you also take into account the fact that we over here at this channel have been watching football a very, very long time, and you do remember that football kind of has a weird way of reminding you that the talent gap is never quite as much as maybe it seems, right? Just when you think that something is clear and obvious in the game of football, it has a way of reminding you that that's not the case. In the NFL, this isn't like college, right? You don't have the number 2 team versus the number 103rd team in Division One, and then they get blown out 76-0. That's not how it works. Most of the time in the NFL, even the best team, the gap between them and the worst team, particularly at the start of the season, is really not all that much. So the margin for error is slim. The Colts in this one, again, have so much stacked against them, but that's kind of where they're at their best, right? I mean, the Colts are an underdog story. They were last year, and they will remain that way as long as you're led by guys like Zaire Franklin, by guys like EJ Speed on defense, and Kenny Moore. These guys kind of have that underdog mentality built into them, and I think the Colts kind of, to some degree as a team, appreciate being counted out. And it's that fact, coupled, of course, with the Week 18 game last year where the Colts were about 20 yards away from making the playoffs. That's what makes this game interesting. And, of course, the Texans as well, being the odds-on favorite to win this division. So it's all that stuff kind of going on at once, and it's all bundled in to this Week 1 game as we approach Sunday right here. So injury report for this one, overall, pretty clean. We know about Josh Downs. Matt Gay, if not guaranteed he's not playing yet, he's not playing, right? So we won't have Matt Gay. We won't have Josh Downs. And the Texans are just fine. The only guy they don't have is some dude named MJ Stewart, who I think is like a second or third string safety. So whatever. Now, with all of that being said, you may take from what I just said, man, the Colts have no chance. Justin's over here like basically saying the Texans are so great and the Colts stink. Well, not so fast. The Colts do have a path to victory, and not one that is pie in the sky. One that makes sense schematically. And I'm not saying it's going to happen, but obviously it's a Colts show. So I'm going to try to spin it in such a way where we're talking about the positives and not so much the negatives here. And then we'll go from there, okay? But without further ado, let's get into the show. But before that, I have to introduce myself. My name is Justin. This right here is the Ride the Bench Colts podcast. As always, ask everyone watching on YouTube and enjoying the show, go ahead, shoot it a like. Going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Audio listeners, 5-star review. Let the people know how much you like it. If you're on YouTube and you don't listen to the audio, by the way, the link is in the description. If you could leave a 5-star, really a big objective for me is to get out to more audio listeners this year. It's an entirely different audience, believe it or not. This is what I've learned. And yeah, subscribe, of course, if you want to be a part of the journey. Trying to get to 3,000. That's the next goal. We're not there yet, but as the season goes on, I'm sure we will be. The most important thing, though, is that we enjoy the show. We have some great discussion about this team, right? Some civil discussion, but some well-thought-out discussion as well in the comment section. Don't insult each other. You can insult me. I could take it. But don't insult each other, okay? Be nice to each other in the comment section. And let's enjoy the preview for this game. Now, as I said, the Colts do have a path to victory in this one. And why do I say that? Well, of course, not just because it's the NFL, but schematically, in theory, this is where the Colts stand. Really, how do I flip it? Okay, you're looking at the Texans, right? That is a great offense in the NFL. How do you stop a great offense? Well, there's two things you have to do, right? Number one, you got to control the time of possession. You got to run the ball well primarily, unless you're just dinking, dunking, 3-yard pass here, 5-yard pass here. You have to be well-balanced on offense. You have to take your time, and you have to run the ball well to ultimately, at the end of the game, say you had the ball for more time than the other team, right? Keep that offense off the field. That's one way to do it. And then number two, on the defensive side of the ball, you have to win at the line of scrimmage, right? You have to keep the run game in check, and you have to pressure the quarterback. Well, on paper, aren't those the two things that are the primary strengths of this Indianapolis Colts team, right? We want to run the ball with Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor. That's the MO of this offense, you would assume. So that right there bodes well to the possibility of us maybe keeping that offense off the field. If I could figure this out, I'm sure Shane Steichen has it in mind. And then two, defensive line, again, that's a strength of the Colts, perhaps the strength of the Indianapolis Colts when you look at it collectively, quite possibly. And on top of that, the Texans, at least on paper, now, of course, they could perform better than we think. Their offensive line is kind of suspect, at least in terms of depth. We know they have Laremy Tunsil there and a couple other guys that I'm sure Texans fans, if you're watching, you're going to be like, we got this guy, we got that guy. But overall, you know, the same way you look at the Colts and say, you ain't got anyone here, you ain't got anyone there. Listen, if it ain't a household name, it doesn't matter overall, right? It just is what it is. So this right here is what the Colts are going to have to do just on an overall level to beat this Texans team. You're going to have to do what you do well, which is win at the line of scrimmage, In fact, period, right? Because to run the ball well, you have to win at the line of scrimmage on offense. But then on defense, to keep the run game in check and to pressure CJ Stroud, you're going to have to win at the line of scrimmage. So my point in all of that is that, hey, the Colts, I mean, that's a solid recipe that we have, and we have the personnel to do it. Now, on the player level, there are guys that, of course, we need to step up for us to have any chance against this team whatsoever. Now, obviously, everyone needs to play well. We need to play well as a team, but if I'm to point out some individual players and units, I can absolutely do that, right? Of course, there is Anthony Richardson. Now, Anthony Richardson, Texans fans won't like to hear this. Right now, he's undefeated, right? Versus CJ Stroud. Now, it may be 1-0, but hell, who cares, right? He's batting 1,000. It is what it is. But one of the things in preseason that I found particularly alarming, I know it's preseason, and I know it doesn't matter, and I know we don't want to panic, but when the Colts were versing the Bengals, second and third stringers, right? The Bengals identified something, at least in that moment, because generally in a preseason game, a defense isn't really going to get all that cute. They're going to sit there. They're going to kind of stay in coverage, kind of like the Colts do throughout the course of an entire season where you don't switch things up too much, right? And you just kind of sit there and just keep everything in front of you. That's all a defense is trying to do in the preseason, but the Bengals showed a lot of pressure, and they made Anthony Richardson decide and kind of try to figure out, okay, who's actually coming on this blitz and who's dropping back into coverage. And in that moment, he was having a tough time with that. So now the Texans, you look at them and you say, okay, their first string defense, number one, I think is underrated right now, and they really started to come on towards the end of last year, but they have DeMeco Ryans, the head coach as well. You have to assume that they saw what the Bengals did against the Colts' first string offense, right? And they're saying, hey, we could do a little bit of the same. Now, the good news for the Colts is that obviously in preseason, all of those different plays with the read options and the running packages, all that stuff were a non-factor. So that's not going to be a one-to-one comparison in terms of the offense that you saw in that game versus what you saw here. But the fact remains is that the Bengals were able to confuse Anthony Richardson and the starting offense with second and third stringers out there. The Texans absolutely took note of that. So Anthony Richardson is going to have to come out here, play a clean game, stay even-keeled, and when things get tough, kind of keep it together, right? I mean, that's one of the things for a young quarterback that is very, very difficult, is just when things aren't going in the flow of the game and you have to figure stuff out a little bit and the game kind of slows down, can you move, or can you, how do I explain it? It's hard to explain. Can you sit there and be grounded in the flow of the game? Or are you having happy feet? Are you a little jittery? Are things moving a little too fast for you? Anthony Richardson is going to have to make sure that the game slows down for him here. And I don't know if that could just happen on a given day, but that's going to be very, very important. The run game for the Colts is going to go a long way in helping him settle in. Another player that has to play really well, in my opinion, is Laitu Latu, right? Last year, we know that the Colts were fourth in sacks. I believe it was fourth, third. Top 5 in sacks, right? I mean, that's pretty good numbers, okay? But the caveat, of course, was the consistency in getting that pressure throughout the course of the game. Now, most teams can't just get pressure nonstop all day, the whole day. But the question is the addition of Laitu Latu enough to bring that element versus this Texans team? We know Kwity Paye and what he brings to the table. He can play. He's a solid pass rusher, but that's about where it ends, right? We'll see if maybe there's another level to his game this year. But as of right now, we could go off of what we've seen. Laitu Latu was drafted to be the game breaker on the defensive line here. Now, obviously, he's young, and obviously week one and what he does this week will not be the be-all, end-all for his career, and pass rusher is a very tough position to come in and immediately produce, but that also, generally speaking, is because guys don't have the full bag of pass rush moves coming into the league. Laitu Latu is pretty unique in that regard. He has the skills to come out and immediately be a problem. He's someone that is going to have a big day, right, for the Colts to come out here and neutralize this Texans offense in any capacity. Other guys, Jalen Jones, Juju Brents, Dallas Flowers, we could go all the way through the secondary, Nick Cross as well, but they have their hands full with Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs, right? You got to keep things in front of you. I mean, obviously Tank Dell's a weapon as well, but we hope that Kenny Moore, to some degree, could keep him in check. That's the last guy we're supposed to worry about is Kenny Moore, right? So if Kenny Moore's getting torched by Tank Dell, we have a real problem. But Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs on paper against Juju Brents and Jalen Jones, I mean, where's your money, right? That's going to be a real challenge on the outside for these young corners, but an awesome test, right? If they could come out and play well, the confidence that's going to give this team and those guys individually is a big deal. they're going to have to get hands on these guys, right? The Colts play that cover 3 defense, but one of the things that gets missed about that Gus Bradley defense is that when it's operating at its highest level, you have guys that are physical and strong that start off in press coverage. Can Juju Brents and Jalen Jones, both of which that's kind of their profile, can they get that done against guys like Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs? It doesn't have to be the whole game. It just has to be in those important moments. They have their hands full. And then finally, somebody in the passing game, not named Michael Pittman Jr., is going to have to step up, right? Derek Stingley is out there on Pittman. Pittman, I'm sure, will get his, but he can only do so much against a corner of that magnitude. Presumably, if you're the Texans, you're going to try to force the Colts to go somewhere that is not Michael Pittman Jr., particularly without Josh Downs on the field. They're going to say, make someone else beat us. You have all these tight ends, right? You got Will Mallory and Kylan Granson, particularly, both very talented pass catchers. You got A.D. Mitchell, who you brought in, who I love, and what an opportunity it is for him to make his mark to start the season. Alec Pierce, the same. Somebody is going to have to step up to help out Anthony Richardson here against a stout Houston Texans defense. But overall, the theme is that the Colts have their hands full, and the only thing they can do is put the Texans in a tougher spot than they thought. If any of you guys ever played any sports competitively, I'm not saying that condescendingly. I'm talking genuine question, because if you have, you're going to know what I'm talking about right now. One sec, I have to cough. When you are in a game that is harder than you expected it to be, right? And you get into a situation where you say, whoa, things aren't exactly going exactly how we thought here. Mentally, things could start to unravel very, very quickly in those situations. That's really what momentum is sometimes in an NFL game is, okay, you have the Colts coming out here and punching them in the mouth, let's say. The Texans are now in a spot. Now, if you're a Texans fan, you're confident in the team's ability to handle that, but ultimately they still have to handle it. They still have to go out and execute it, right? So if you're the Colts getting off to a hot start, obviously any game getting off to a hot start is great. But man, if you're the Colts and you could get the ball first, score a touchdown, and then maybe force a turnover and capitalize on that, you put the Texans in a spot that's significantly more difficult than perhaps they thought it was going to be. And that is maybe a recipe for disaster for them, or at least a recipe for the Colts to come out and win. That's what they were able to do last year versus the Texans, albeit we know it's not the same Texans team now that we saw early last season. But they came out, they punched them in the mouth, and sure, they let them come back a little bit. But ultimately, the Colts won that game pretty handily. We're going to have to see some of that this week, but, you know, that's the game preview right there. And the next time I see you and you see me is going to be after the game, and we're going to know the truth. Can the Colts break a 10-season streak of losing in week 1? We're about to find out. But that right there is an episode. Like, subscribe, all that type of stuff. Gosh, I'm burping. Like, subscribe, all that type of stuff. And as always, go Colts.